The daddy of Dark Souls. And no, I'm not talking about Miyazaki, even though, obviously, yes, him too. Instead, I'm talking about FromSoftware's Kingsfield series, specifically the last one to ever release, Kingsfield: The Ancient City from 2001 on the PS2, a first-person dungeon crawler. The Souls series is sometimes called the spiritual successor of Kingsfield, and nowhere is that more apparent than in this final game. So this video will not only look at those connections, but it will also explore Kingsfield: The Ancient City in its own right. This is a very weird game that most people have not even heard of, but it deserves to be talked about and looked at, especially if you're a fan of modern FromSoft. However, the final Kingsfield came out 20 years ago. If only I had some way of going back in time. Yeah! Now I want to give you the full Kingsfield experience, and part of that is the confusion you'll feel when someone says to you, oh, Kingsfield 1 is actually Kingsfield 2. So let me educate you real quick. Here's how the game's released in Japan. Kingsfield 1, Kingsfield 2, Kingsfield 3, Kingsfield 4. Easy, perfect, love it. However, this one never released outside of Japan. So instead, we got Kingsfield 1, Kingsfield 2, and Kingsfield 3, Kingsfield: The Ancient City. For the rest of the video, for the sake of consistency, I'll be using these names, not the Japanese ones. Alright, we good? Cool. The story for this game is pretty straightforward, so let's just cover it at the start. So basically there's this idol, the Idol of Sorrow, and it was stolen from this city, the Ancient City. Turns out, shocker, the idol was cursed, and as a result, the once prosperous kingdom of Helidon has fallen into a state of decay and disease and corruption. Generally bad stuff. So a sword master leads an expedition to return the Idol of Sorrow, but it fails and the idol is presumed lost forever as the kingdom continues to decay. But then, miraculously, a hooded figure brings the idol to you, Prince Devian, a prince of a neighboring kingdom, to return the idol once and for all. And that's the game, you more or less struggling to single-handedly return a cursed idol that an entire expedition already failed to do. And with that out of the way, we are finally in the game, screen 1, here we go. But first, let's look at, comparatively, how FromSoft usually starts off their games in the Souls series. Something that I think FromSoft typically does a good job at is having great welcome to the game moments. These are memorable encounters right at the beginning of their games that not only hook you in, but also set the tone for the rest of the experience. Demon Souls. You're killing some fairly easy enemies, getting lulled into thinking, hey, this game isn't as hard as people said, and then boom, you get sat on by the boss and die. Welcome to Demon Souls. Prepare to die. Dark Souls. All you have is a broken sword as you stumble out of your prison cell. You're still learning the controls, and then boom, the asylum demon drops down from the roof. Welcome to Dark Souls. Prepare to die. Now what does Kingsfield: The Ancient City do? You're on screen 1, you see something on the ground to your right, you take 2 steps, and then the ground collapses as you fall into lava and die. Welcome to Kingsfield. Fuck you. Kingsfield 1 had something similar, but at least there it felt kind of fair. Here it feels like FromSoft is just messing with me. And that's because they are. But I actually kind of love this because this death isn't a big deal, and it teaches you that death is around every corner, you need to be observant, and the devs like to prank people, so get used to it. Alright, with our first death out of the way, let's start talking about the game. So while a lot of the experience takes place underground in dungeons and caves, I think this brief introduction area on the surface is a smart one. It's one thing to tell us that the world is suffering through a cutscene, but it's another for us as the player to feel it. Things are not looking good. This little girl's mom is sick and dying in bed. This man's wife has gone missing, and then he himself ends up dying while you search. This well of healing has dried up. Monsters have seemingly overrun the area, and everything is in a state of ruin. All of this together creates a familiar feeling to the Souls games. The atmosphere is heavy. The key word that comes to mind is bleak. This is a bleak world, and you feel that before you ever step foot into the catacombs. The people are struggling. You could even call some of them crestfallen. Yep, I bet you didn't think it went back that far, but it sure does. This is how you know it's a FromSoft game. Also worth pointing out is the lava in the surrounding areas. This stuck in my mind as an interesting choice because I couldn't think of other games that began like that. Fire or lava areas are almost always near the middle or end of games, so this subversion almost seems to communicate that we should prepare for a weird one. So as I took all this in, my first 30 minutes or so was spent running around with a club I found and some scraps of armor. Eventually I made my way into the mines nearby. It wouldn't be Kingsfield without some good old-fashioned slime combat. In the mines, I found a rock that allowed me to cure the sick mother from before, and as a reward, I got my first magic spell, Fireball. This is the only time the game forces you to find find and learn a spell to progress, since you need it to burn a spider web in your path. For the rest of the game, it's on you to find those secret areas and hidden rooms if you want more magic and weapons. Speaking of missable items, there's actually a huge one right next to the house with the mother and daughter. Right here you find the clarity bracelet, and for the rest of the game, you should never take it off because it's just too good. It quintuples the amount of MP you have for casting magic. However, it never felt like I had loads of magic to spare. No, it actually felt like this was what the base amount of MP should have been. Magic is borderline unusable without this item because of how little MP you'll have. I think when I first got it, I could only cast Fireball once, maybe twice before needing to restore it. So yeah, kind of a wild choice on FromSoft's part to make such an essential item like this hidden and missable right at the very start. Part of me hates it, but part of me loves it. It's moments like these where it really does feel like the developers had a fuck you attitude. This is our game. Yes, it's unfair. Deal with it or move on. And with that, say goodbye to the surface. We are going underground and into the ancient city. More than anything, this is a descent, and we eventually get pretty deep. As a rule of thumb, if you're going down, you're probably going the right way. However, it's time to talk about the combat and gameplay. I've put it off long enough. This is a first-person dungeon crawler. Now, I don't want to repeat myself too much from my other Kingsfield video, but essentially, this game is very similar to Kingsfield 1. And just like that game, there are two words that perfectly describe the combat: clunky and slow. This gets to the heart of what the Kingsfield experience is like, and is part of why I think most people might find this game unbearable at times. You move slow and you turn even slower. This is what it looks like to fully turn around. If the idea of doing this yourself is upsetting, this game is definitely not for you. Clearly, I was able to tolerate this, and it even grew on me over time, but I wouldn't blame anyone wanting to pass on the game for this alone. Back to the combat, most encounters will go one of two ways. The first is you attack, you back up, wait for your power meter to fill up again, attack, back up, and I think you get the idea. The second is you Tokyo drift around them, because as slow as you turn, they turn even slower, and you can abuse this to stay behind them while you swing away. Now, not every encounter is this bare bones. Rooms with multiple enemies will force you to change things up by being clever, and ranged magic can also break up the monotony of melee combat. Also, there's just overall better AI than the last game. Some enemies will even attempt to block and dodge your attacks. Ironically, you can't do either of those things, but hey, I guess they were saving that for the Souls games. So yeah, basically the same as Kingsfield 1, just a bit refined across the board, especially when it comes to the quality of the animations. You might be thinking, hey, combat seems kinda rough. Why do people like these games? And I totally get that sentiment, but for me at least, it comes down to the joy of exploration and discovery that this game offers. You never know what's going to be around each corner. There are so many enemies to fight, items to find, and secrets to uncover. For Kingsfield 1, I said it was a first-person Metroidvania, and while I did get a little bit of pushback from some people, I'm going to stand by that description for this game too. Yes, it's a bit of a stretch since it doesn't share all the characteristics that you might expect from a proper Metroidvania, but there's enough here that I think it fits. There are locked doors you'll have to come back to later once you have the right keys, there's backtracking, there's navigating with the struggle of where do I go next, and the entire world's interconnected. Exploration is what the Kingsfield series is really about, and I think it's at its best in this game. I mentioned in the last video how I was disappointed by how many areas were simply too similar visually to each other, but I can happily say that that's been more or less completely addressed here. We have a wide range of environments, color palettes, and environmental details that expand beyond blank wall with a single texture. I still would get lost at times, but it no longer felt like the game's fault for failing to distinguish between areas. Back to my playthrough, I eventually made my way to this giant underground tower, but I want to give you guys the Kingsfield experience, so here's a brief summary of how I got there. First, I walked through some spider webs that made me turn even more slowly than normal. Then I found this guy who wanted to die, and I was like, yo, I feel that, so I killed him and took his key. I used that key on a door to a giant spider boss, which I beat by running around in a circle for 5 minutes. Then I explored. Then I found some undead soldiers, but a little bug ran off whenever I killed them, so I think we may have a Ratatouille situation on our hands. Then I explored some more, found some treasure, got punched in the face by a giant golem. Finally, I found an NPC who sold me a bow, but he gave me some weird advice about barrels being trapped. Obviously, I didn't listen to him though, because I'd found a lot of treasure in barrels at that point, and he was probably just lying. And after that, I finally made it to the central tower. I didn't realize this at the time, but what's cool about this tower is that it acts as a sort of central hub for the rest of the game, as you unlock more paths and loop back around to it now and then. In fact, I distinctly remember having this oh shit moment where I reached a lower level of the tower, looked up, and recognized that upper area as where I was hours before. Then I looked down and realized it went even lower still. Honestly, just great level design. Somewhat related, one of the big things that I think separates Kingsfield the Ancient City from its predecessors is how it plays with verticality. No longer is it just endless hallways. We finally have all these large environments that explore the third dimension in interesting ways on the micro room-to-room scale, as well as the macro world design scale. There's a real sense of depth. Kind of reminds me of this one game from 2009 that also had lots of verticality. So after taking the sights of the tower, I pushed on deeper into the dungeon. And I mentioned this earlier, but this is a great opportunity to really stress how this game's charm, for me, lies in the fact that you never know what's coming. It could be something bizarre just as easily as it could be something beautiful and melancholy. For example, as I went just a bit further, I stumbled across straight up xenomorphs from Alien. Like, sure, why not? Cool. But once I got over that shock, I was rewarded with something even better. Up until now, I had mostly just been going down, deeper and deeper, but then I found a set of stairs going up, and they kept going up and up and up, until finally I reached the end, which was a forest on the surface. I took a minute just to look around and take in the colors and the environmental details. It felt like I was suddenly playing a different game, a happier game. You need brief pockets of color and humanity in games like this. The Soul series nails this as well. The world is never entirely lost, and you'll always find at least a few NPCs hanging on to hope, along with the natural beauty of the world alongside them. Kingsfield is an extremely lonely experience, but moments like this do a lot to help alleviate that feeling at least a little. Now, let's talk about fake walls. Quick refresher since I talked about it in the other Kingsfield video, fake or illusory walls have been a staple of the Souls series for a while, but it comes from the old school tradition that began in Kingsfield. In the Kingsfield games, the way they work is by you pressing the X or interact button while facing a wall, and sometimes you're rewarded with the wall sliding away to reveal a hidden room. In Kingsfield 1, I talked about how tedious this process was due to the fact that there were simply so many blank walls, and the fake ones were placed seemingly at random. So the end result was a lot of playtime pressing my face against walls and mashing X. I'm happy to say that Kingsfield the Ancient City does a much better job at handling this side of the game. In short, there are just far fewer walls that could even have secrets behind them, and that's due to the level design. This game has a lot more rooms where parts of the wall would stick out, or you'd be in some sort of cave with uneven or angled walls. Any wall that wasn't just flat and vertical would never have a secret behind it, and realizing that saved me a lot of time. On top of that, I found that most of the secrets felt less random than last time. Sometimes I would just look at a wall, feel that something was off due to its placement, and walk up to it to be rewarded with a hidden room. And if that's not enough, there are even two items that can significantly help with your secret finding endeavors. The first is a full 3D map of the entire game, and the second is a necklace that highlights any fake walls in your sight. Ironically though, I believe both of these are behind fake walls themselves, so there's a good chance you'll never find them if you're already struggling. You might be thinking this sort of help goes too far in trivializing all the secrets, but I actually think it's fine because you get them right near the end of the game anyway, so it's more just a tool for the completionists out there. Alright, that's enough about walls, let's talk about the traps here. Remember when I said exploration was the focus of this game? Well, all the traps you have to deal with are a close second. There are just so many fun ideas here. Oh look, there's a skeleton ringing a bell. I wonder what that does. Oh my god, no. There's also this one where you open a chest, it poisons you, and then the treasure inside is just an antidote for that poison. Stuff like this is honestly just funny as hell. My personal favorite is how this entire room drops out from under you and you fall into piranha-infested water. Real classic stuff here. Side note, this trap takes place in what is basically the alpha version of Sen's Fortress, right down to the snake men nearby. So many areas in this game are punctuated by these little memorable encounters where you feel the devs are just messing with you, but in a fun way. There were traps in Kingsfield 1, but here I really feel like FromSoft made it a priority and part of the identity of the game itself. It really is a shame we never got another Kingsfield because I would have loved to see how they cranked up the nonsense even more. Moving on, I can't believe it's taken me this long to mention, but we gotta talk about the glue that holds everything together, the vibes, or more specifically, the music. It's hard to describe, but Kingsfield music has a very distinctive feel to it, and it definitely enhances the mysterious mood of the game. You'll be walking along in the dark, it's silent except for your footsteps, and then, out of the darkness, you hear it. This is Kingsfield. This is what it's about. Exploring old dungeons, juking skeletons, and having music like this blast the whole time. It really is a unique experience. Speaking of things I should have mentioned by now, this game, as well as Kingsfield 1, has no loading screens. You can play it start to finish without ever being taken out of the game. Not only is this worth mentioning for the technical achievement that it is, especially the first one in 1995, but it's also notable because there aren't even cutscenes after the intro either. That means that you're always in control, and the only thing that really stops the action is talking to NPCs or pausing the game. Think about how this affects the process of coming across visual spectacles or bosses. There's something so odd and low-key about the feeling of wandering into a boss room and then you just fight them right away. Bosses aren't events like they might be in other games. Here, it's just another guy to kill. And this is probably giving FromSoft a bit too much credit, but this does make the entire experience feel a bit more grounded than it might have been otherwise. You really are just a dude wandering around the dungeon, and both your deaths and victories aren't framed as big deals. It's just another moment in the ancient city. So this game is pretty cool, and it's not just because it has an ice area. It's actually because this area contains big ice guys that run up and punch you, and this is good. As I explored this area, I found a lot of frozen things, including this dwarf blacksmith. I pressed on until I reached a lava area nearby where I got to fight some fire Pokemon, and then I reached a giant demon boss. I attacked him for a bit, he died, and then I went back to the ice zone to see that it was now all unfrozen, including our blacksmith friend who returned back to his home. So with that, let's talk about item durability. Long story short, it doesn't really matter. It goes down over time, but you find new gear so frequently that it's almost a complete non-issue. In fact, I didn't even notice it was a mechanic until about halfway through the game. Whenever you find a new weapon or piece of armor, 9 times out of 10, it's just a straight upgrade, so why bother repairing? However, if you do want to repair, the game has an interesting idea for handling that. Our blacksmith here can repair any weapon or piece of armor. This is free to do, but you have to wait in real time anywhere from 4 to 10 minutes for your gear to get fixed. So you drop it off, and then your options are to wait in the room or come back later. This is strange and seemingly pointless, but honestly, it's perfectly on brand for Kingsfield. I've just come to expect weird, quirky things like this as normal. However, before we move on, I do have to note that you can actually repair multiple pieces of gear at once. In fact, you could repair your entire inventory in one go if you wanted to. Now, given this mechanic of waiting in real time, I think it's fair to assume that this process could take hours. After all, if you have 20 swords and they each take 5 minutes to repair, it seems like you'd be waiting 100 minutes, right? Well, actually, they all repair at the same time. So in that example I just gave, it would only take 5 minutes for all of your items to be repaired. Thus, I am proposing the lore theory that the blacksmith is just a dick. If I have to wait the same amount of time for one sword versus 20 swords being repaired, that must mean that he has the ability to repair weapons instantly or near instantly, but instead he chooses to hold on to them and make me wait. I'm open to lore feedback, but I think this is a pretty solid theory. Let me know. In the same way that durability is an interesting idea on paper that ultimately doesn't really affect the game, let's talk about two more: weapon level and magic level. So every individual weapon and magic spell has a level associated with it. Everything starts at level 1, and as you use it, it goes up to level 3. With weapons, getting one to level 3 not only increases its damage, but it also gives you a special magic attack. And yes, this even includes your fists. With magic, it's the same basic idea. Leveling up attack spells increases their damage, and leveling up utility spells increases their potency. But it actually even goes a step further, with spells sometimes getting bigger, having a different animation, or even gaining new abilities altogether. For example, at level 3, my healing spell gave me the ability to slow down enemies with melee attacks for a few seconds after using it. Now, this all sounds awesome, and it is, but the problem is that you'll never see these unless you really go out of your way to grind. Like I mentioned earlier, I found new gear often, so it was rare if I even made it to level 2, let alone level 3 with a weapon. And the same was true for spells, as they were also found fairly often, and new spells were almost always better than old ones. There's a pretty steady power increase for each new thing you find. These are great ideas, and I really appreciate all the effort that went into making 3 different versions of each spell, but it's a little confusing how much of a non-factor it is when playing the game normally. The only spell I got to level 3 naturally was my healing spell. To give some more perspective on how bad the numbers are, I had this meteor spell that I really liked, so I wanted to see how long it would take to max out. I found a boss near the end of the game that endlessly summoned skeletons, so it seemed like the perfect place to just grind it out. I started at 90,000 experience and I ended with 123,000. Each skeleton was worth only 100 EXP, so yeah, you can do the math. It took a pretty long time. Was it worth it? Probably not, since the game was essentially over at that point, but it does look pretty cool. Alright, before we get to the final section, I wanted to go over a few lingering observations and thoughts that I had. First, just like Kingsfield 1, teleporting exists in this game, but it's a little different. You still place these colored guide stones into statues that act as teleport locations, but this time you can only teleport when standing on these magic circles on the ground. I like this change, because it slightly increases the tension during moments where you might have otherwise just teleported away. Next thing, check out this flooded city. I was sort of blown away by this whole area and how closely it mirrors New Londo. It even has the backstory of people flooding it on purpose to try and contain some great evil and darkness. Pretty neat. Up next, I really love how there are all these hidden treasures in the environment that reward attentiveness. Like maybe you look up, notice something stuck to the ceiling, and shoot it down. Or maybe you see a magic crystal stuck in a spider web, so you have to burn it down and then figure out where it fell down to. Good stuff. There are tons of little secrets like this, and I just think they're so much fun. And lastly, yes, this game does have a swamp area that poisons you. So we finally get to see the FromSoft we know and love starting to take shape. And with that, it is finally time to talk about how to get to the end of the game. Step 1. As part of this big snake temple, we find the corpse of the leader of the expedition from the beginning of the game. And next to him is the lawful blade. We'll take this for later. Step 2. We find all 4 keys to unlock the chests in the forest and then open them to receive 4 black eyes. Step 3. We take those eyes to a big door behind the king's throne and they open it up for us. Step 4. We enter, go up a long flight of stairs, and find a magic crystal surrounded by ancient stone golems and roots. Then the lawful blade floats out of our inventory, plunges into the crystal, and transforms into the famous Moonlight Sword. Yes, that Moonlight Sword. This sword also gets an absurd orbital strike magic attack, which is very fun. Before we tackle the final boss though, the last thing we need to do is backtrack and find all the pieces of Muse armor, which were floating inside these energy orbs around the map. This isn't necessary, but it's the best armor in the game, so why not? With the Moonlight Sword, we can finally break through and get them all. And with that, we can march on over to the final area in the deepest part of the dungeon. I place the Idol of Sorrow on the pedestal, and then... So yeah, we go even deeper. This entire area is gross and trippy. It's like we're inside of some giant monster with the floor, walls, and ceiling all pulsating and fleshy with monsters coming out and walking around. I got heavy reverse osmosis Jones vibes, which coincidentally came out the same year as this game, just a few months before. There are enemies everywhere. It's a mess. There's even dragons just flying around, which I guess was the perfect time for me to pull out my bow with homing arrows. But I finally made my way to this guy half melted into a throne of dark material at the heart of it all. 3 hits from the Moonlight Greatsword, he turns to stone, crumbles away, and that's it. We beat the game. So if you've been curious about Kingsfield and you think you can put up with all the clunkiness and all the jank, Kingsfield the Ancient City is probably the best place to start. It really is an experience, and a video like this can only go so far in conveying what that experience feels like. It's more than the sum of its parts, and fans are still talking about it to this day for a reason. Will FromSoft ever return to this series? Honestly, not a chance. It's just too niche for how big they are these days, and the original people who worked on the game have moved on long ago. I think there's something special here, and while it's a shame we'll never see FromSoft's attempt at another entry, that doesn't mean that they're the only ones who can make it work. I'm very curious to see another developer's attempt at modernizing the series without straying too far from the idiosyncrasies that make it special. Yes, this game is very interesting as a way of connecting the dots between FromSoft then and now, but it's also just a wild game in its own right, and I hope I've done an okay job at sharing why I think it's special and still worth looking at. Thanks for watching. This video has an interesting sponsor. It's Wizards of the Coast, which if you didn't know, is the company that owns Dungeons & Dragons. They have a new game coming out today, and it's an online co-op hack and slash looter minus the shooter. At first I was wondering why they reached out to me, but then I saw the game had a roll button, and it all made sense. So here was my experience playing with a few friends. Nice. 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 Oh, what the? You can see that? Time for my super move. Time for my super move that always wins.
Wait, you can just spam that?
It's my ultimate.
That's so chill.
Come on, man. Come on, jump up. Jump up, bro. Come on.
I'm trying.
What are you doing, dude?
Alright.
There you go.
I think we need to increase the difficulty substantially. What are you doing?
It's super jump attack.
Wait, yeah, keep doing that. Can you just keep flipping them?
I'll be like breakfast, dude.
Yeah, you're making pancakes. So yeah, if you've got a couple friends and want to button mash your way through some goblins, click on the link in the description and check out Dark Alliance.
Pine, how do you get a D&D player to go out with you?
I don't know, you roll a persuasion check.
Okay.
Is that right?
He was right, wasn't he?
Was that right?
No.
Wait, really?
Do you roll initiative?
You ask them for a D8.
Oh.